Welcome back. Christopher Taylor, Sovereign Harmony. Wanted to check in with everybody here, midsummer report. Things are about to get a little dicey, to say the least. You kind of just came through the whole spring period with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction and everything happening there. Now we're going to get things getting a little more complicated, we'll just say, um, starting the second half of this year. And again, if you don't follow me on either Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, I encourage you to as well, because you'll get more updates. Like, for example, I'm going to talk about this full moon coming up today, just so we know, we orient ourselves here. Today is Wednesday, July 17th. Coming up this weekend, Saturday night into Sunday, that is when we have this 29-degree Capricorn full moon. It's the second full moon in Capricorn. We had one at 0 or 1 degrees Capricorn here a month ago, and so this is pretty significant. I don't usually include the full moons and new moons in these reports. That's something for, if you're following me on the social media realm, I cover the full moons and new moons in more depth. But I want to bring this one up because of how it coincides with what is coming up here as we get to the end of the summer, and that being Pluto backing to that degree, 29 degrees Capricorn, for its final run, literally the final time that Pluto will be in Capricorn in anyone's lifetime that is alive today. And it's been in Capricorn since about 2008. So it's been 16 years, pretty good run. And I've talked about this extensively in previous videos, and we'll cover it obviously again here, what that means. But this full moon, I want to cover it mostly because of how it relates to Pluto now coming back. And Pluto will come back September 1st. It'll go direct in October, but it won't go previous to the 29th degree. It's going to be at the 29th degree the entire time that it's in Capricorn, from September 1st to November 19th. And so that's going to be obviously an important energy, especially here in the US, where we have obviously the contest coming up in November. And, with things that just happened here this last weekend and whatnot, we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So this is an interesting energy to have coming up for that time period. Anyway, so first thing I want to discuss is that full moon at 29 degrees Capricorn. This is what it looks like. Okay, generally speaking, you can see what I've highlighted here. So there's the moon right here at 29 Capricorn, and what that's going to do is basically, essentially, I see it energetically as pulling Pluto back to that 29th degree. It's kind of, it's only about a degree off. It's a different sign. Pluto's in Aquarius, but it almost has a way of like pulling Pluto back to Capricorn to finalize its purpose in that sign before it heads off to Aquarius, where it's going to be till like 2044, I believe. So the next 20 years, Pluto is going to be in Aquarius. And very different energy than the last 16 years or so that we've had Pluto in Capricorn. Pluto in Capricorn has been a lot about top-down, like government, corporation, kind of power behind the scenes sort of thing. That's really what Pluto in Capricorn has to do, is that power behind the doors, behind the curtains, essentially, and how that comes down. Pluto in Aquarius, a lot more to do with individuation and power in the individual, power in the people. Okay. So if there are any intentions by people in the establishment, for example, that would want to enforce certain rules and create restrictions, Pluto in Capricorn has been the time for that. And it's no coincidence that we had the virus come out. It came out like it became a thing right around the Saturn Pluto conjunction. So back then in 2020, Saturn was with Pluto in Capricorn. And that's really what kind of set off the whole lockdown. That energy of lockdown is very Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn, and that's what we saw happen there. But anyway, so Pluto is about to finish up there, and I think that this full moon really signifies that. Like, we're at this place where it's like, all right, prepare. Let's prepare ourselves for what's on the horizon here at the end of the summer and into the fall, because I feel like we haven't seen anything yet when it comes to things on a political level in the U.S. Lots has transpired in the last few months, but expect it to intensify and increase as we move through. And that's not to instill fear. That's just kind of the way these energies are. And this full moon is just a wake up to remind ourselves, like, okay, this it's going to get. We got to hold our own essentially as sovereign individuals, not let the outside world dictate how we feel, how we're doing, and kind of um, push our energy outward to the world rather than having it crash in on us and change us and put us in certain states of being. Is sort of a time to get responsible. Okay. And that's a key word for Capricorn is responsible. Okay. So this is again the second full moon in Capricorn. We just had one a month ago at about 0 to 1 degrees Capricorn. And so this is relatively rare, not completely totally rare, but to have full moon in the same sign two in a row, essentially. It can only happen if there is a full moon at the first couple degrees and then it lands in the last couple degrees. It's the only way it can occur, and that's the way it occurred this time. But it is reminding us of our sovereign responsibility, okay, to hold our emotions in check, our thoughts in check, because things could get a little crazy in the outer world. And the more we can do that as individuals, the less that's going to have an effect on us. And there's a lot to do with finishing up. Not only is it 29th degree here, but it's forming, a pleasant sextile to Neptune up here at 29 degrees Pisces, which just started to go retrograde in Pisces along with Saturn. And I talked about that in my last video. So Saturn and Neptune are, in that final sign of the zodiac, Neptune at the final degree of the final sign. So this is really, really about like a long-term finishing of things. So getting things complete to move forward. Okay. And so the next time that both Saturn and Neptune move direct, they're going to move themselves right into Aries in 2025. They're going to back up a little bit more, and they're going to meet up with each other at 0 degrees Aries, which is the start of the zodiac. And that's going to be, I think, February of 2026. And so we're kind of seeing this final retrograde in Pisces for both of these. This is the end, and we're going to see some new beginnings coming here, 2025, 2026, especially 2026, when they join each other at 0 degrees Aries. And for me, this has a lot to do with, and there was lots of evidence for this in recent days, the way that media works. So Neptune in Pisces has a lot to do with narrative creation, whereas Saturn in Pisces is kind of clarifying the truth of a narrative, what's true, what isn't. Okay, so a lot of things that have been narrative driven since 2011, essentially, since Neptune entered Pisces, this last year and a half or so, and for the next year and a half or so, Saturn has been kind of fixing that. Like I refer to it as, F around and find out. Neptune F around, Saturn find out, right? So it's really just clarifying and whatnot. And so lots of things in the media, like just the most recent example, with the attempted shooting assassination here that we saw in Pennsylvania, there were initial media reports saying that, the Secret Service had to pull him off stage because he fell or something like that. There was all kinds of, politically driven messaging. It's like when it's pretty clear, when all the dust cleared, what happened there. But how can media institutions even be allowed to still exist when you're putting out, headlines like that are obviously false? And I think, people are and have been gradually moving away from mainstream corporate media, and independent media has really been getting a footing. And I think this is really the symbolic of that. Everything that's going to happen here in the next several months is going to amplify that. All this, the information that just isn't that true, and being made aware of what is true, and that's that Saturn and Pisces. And so people, by the time we get to 2026, 0 degrees Aries, I feel like on a very practical level, it's just not going to be financially viable for corporate media to continue, in my opinion. I think it's going to just really collapse into independent pieces, similar to like if you're familiar, like what happened with like Tucker Carlson. He used to work for CNN, then he worked for Fox. Now he works on his own and he does just fine, right? And so I think there's going to be lots of different opinions, lots of different, sources, and that's part of that Pluto and Aquarius as well. Okay, it's individuation. So it's not going to all be consolidated like with Pluto and Capricorn, consolidated, centralized power. Now there's the sense of decentralization of information. Okay, so it's really going to take hold in the next few years here. Not that it hasn't started yet. But anyway, so that this full moon is bringing a lot of this into our awareness. Okay, and I've got a few other things highlighted here. The Mercury in a Leo here squaring Uranus in Taurus, that has more to do with the Mercury retrograde that I'm going to talk about here next. That aspect is going to be essentially locked in and out for a couple of months here, starting this weekend, essentially. So from this weekend until probably like mid-September, we're going to see that Mercury Uranus, and that has a lot to do with like different pieces of information and conflicting information and just too much information essentially as well. And so we're going to see this really pick up over the next couple of months. So it's going to be, again, even more important for us to be sovereignly responsible for our thoughts and our emotional state, because there's going to be lots of conflicting info coming and swinging around here the next couple of months. They also highlighted the Venus Jupiter. That's going to be in a nice little sextile there for the full moon. If anything, that adds just a little bit of lightness to this, which is good. It needs it. And then I also highlighted here Mars trining that Pluto. So Mars is going to be at 29 degrees just before that full moon. So it'll be forming that sextile to Neptune, the trine to the moon, to Pluto, and enters Gemini. And that really shakes things up a bit too. Mars and Gemini. Gemini is, very, very dualistic and a lot of multiplicity. Okay, so Mars being action. This is lots of options, lots of going different directions. So things are going to get somewhat chaotic here. Again, I don't want to underplay that. So expect that to be on the horizon here. So anyway, we'll move on from that. Next thing I want to talk about is Mercury retrograde. So you can see here, it's going to turn retrograde at 4 degrees Virgo, and then it will turn direct at 21 degrees Leo in late August. So most of August, essentially. And if we're talking about the shadow zone anyway, actually last night, so on Tuesday night, the 16th, that is when Mercury entered the shadow. So in other words, it entered right where Mercury is going to turn direct at the end of the retrograde cycle. So about 21 degrees Leo. So that's where it's kind of sitting right now, 22 degrees or so Leo. And it's going to hit 4 degrees Virgo on August 4th, head backwards, and then it'll turn direct at 21 degrees Leo, August 28th, and then it'll leave its shadow here in early to mid-September. And again, that whole time, we're going to be talking about, what I just talked about, I should say, is that Mercury squaring Uranus. So this is what it looks like the moment when Mercury will turn retrograde at 4 degrees Virgo on August 4th. That's an interesting little synchronicity there too. August 4th, 4 degrees, if you're getting into the numerology of it all, just something to think about. I won't get too into it. This is going to occur just hours after a new moon. So we have that full moon coming up on the 21st, and then the next major lunation, the new moon in Leo, is going to happen just before Mercury goes retrograde. Okay, and there's Uranus right there, where it will meet up with. It's just meeting up with it this weekend for that full moon. And then when it goes retrograde, it's going to meet up with it for its second square and then its third square later. So this is all that information flying around, etc. But the main kind of theme of this retrograde from Virgo to Leo, and then it's happening right as we have a new moon in Leo. Mercury is going to come back and basically meet up with the sun right around, not too far from where that new moon is going to be in early August. And so there's a big theme of linking essentially what Virgo has to do with, which is service, purpose, in Leo being that like pure heart, like where our heart truly lies. Okay. And so there's a sense of checking in with ourselves, like really checking in. That's what this Mercury retrograde has to do with, is getting very specific with the details about what we truly want in our life. Okay. And with everything flying around, that can be pretty tough to do. Mars and Gemini, It's going to be creeping up to Jupiter here, which I'm going to talk about next. So it's going to be challenging these next couple of months. This retrograde really is challenging us to focus where we, focus on where our hearts lie, and then how we can practically use that in the world. So if there's any place in our lives where we just have to basically face the truth about that, where we're maybe our job just isn't doing it for us, right? That's a good example of that. What you're doing for work, your service or whatever, doesn't align with your heart. That's an example of that kind of thing. But in all cases, this really does have to do on a collective level of really looking at things seriously, and it's probably triggered by all the things flying around, all the information, all the options, all the possibilities. And it's like when that happens, it kind of forces you to just take a step back and say, whoa, what matters to me? And that's really what this Mercury retrograde has to do with finding out what matters to us on a personal level. Okay, so we'll move on from that one. So the next thing I want to talk about, it's pretty big. It's going to kind of encompass all of these in the next slide here. So August 18th, 19th time frame, there's going to be a T-square. Okay, that's when there's an opposition, and then there's a planet that is forming a square on one side to both of those planets that are opposing each other. So generally speaking, so this general time frame, August 18th, 19th is going to be pretty exact. There's also going to be the next full moon is going to be happening right around that time as well. Full moon in Aquarius, late Aquarius. Okay. And then Mars is also going to join in on here. So what this T-square involves, just so we go over that, it's going to be Jupiter, which we now know is in Gemini. It's been in Gemini a couple months now. Is going to come up to square Saturn. That's the big part of this. The biggest leg of this T-square is this Jupiter square Saturn. That's going to happen around 17 degrees. Jupiter in Gemini, Saturn in Pisces. Okay. And then Venus at that same time is going to be in Virgo. And so it will be squaring Jupiter up in Gemini and opposing Saturn in Pisces. So that's, a bit of a quick mover, just a couple of days there, but Mars is going to spread it out a little bit, several days before that August 18th, 19th triple, or I should say T-square. It's going to start it out by instigating, and instigating is probably a good word for Mars and Gemini. That's really what that energy entails. It's a lot of like instigating movement and action, and thinking, etc. So Mars conjunct Jupiter around the 14th, and then over the next few days, it'll then square Saturn, and then finally it will square Venus, from Gemini to Virgo, from Mars to Venus. And so it's getting in on the act, essentially, okay? And so it's the trigger for this T-square energy. So let's take a look at that on the chart. So this is this chart, the timing of this chart. I think I just did it late on the 18th. I just took a random shot of what's going on around that time. And so I said that this is going to occur. There's going to be a full moon. Like I think it's on the 20th. I'm not sure. You can look, but that's the moon at 18 degrees Aquarius. So we're talking like 16 hours after this shot is taken is about when we're going to see that full moon in Aquarius, and that's going to occur. Notice Mercury, because it started out retrograding at 4 degrees Virgo, has now backed up, and it's going to join the sun. That happens in the middle of every Mercury retrograde. It's what's called the inferior conjunction, and so it's really the pit of this Mercury retrograde and the themes that I just talked about, but really getting serious, really getting honest about where our heart lies and what is or isn't satisfying it. Okay. And so just as this T-square is amped up, you can see Jupiter there at 17 degrees Gemini, Saturn at 17 degrees Pisces, and then there's Venus at 17 degrees Virgo. So just as that is amping up, we're at the pit of the Mercury retrograde. So it's all kind of happening at the same time. So August is got a lot of serious energy around it. A lot of needing to take responsibility for ourselves in a lot of ways. And so that square between Jupiter and Saturn, like I said, that's the primary leg of this T-square. The other ones are kind of quick moving. Mars is just kind of the instigator to get us aware of it. And then Venus just kind of completes the circuit essentially. Okay, but Venus is in that sign of Virgo, same sign that the Mercury retrograde starts in, and so again we're on this theme. Venus and Virgo um, is this desire for order and purpose in life. So like where are we focusing our energy? It's about taking things seriously, essentially, right? And so that energy is opposing Saturn. Okay. And so then that kind of brings in themes of like relationship, for example. Okay. Saturn in Pisces has a lot to do with completing and finishing things, like we said before. Um, and so on a karmic level, it's like, what do we have to, what baggage do we have to get rid of to be able to seriously approach what is in our hearts? What's preventing that? There might be things we have to, if it's specifically about relationships, it could be we've got some hurts we've got to get over before we could really get serious about where our hearts lie now. So maybe that's dragging us down, for example. But it could apply it in many different ways. And then we have Jupiter and Mars, which is an amped up energy. Um, Neutrally speaking, it's amped up. I mean, whether it's positive or negative depends on how we're using it, how we're utilizing it. But that's really, it really says that there's options essentially. So lots of options, and look this way, look that way, look that way. And what about here, right? And that's really forcing this opposition to have to come into balance. What do we need to complete and get rid of? Um, let's not no more playing around with our heart and what we want. Like let's really do something. And then at that same time, we've got that inferior conjunction, so we're in the pit around August 18th, 19th, 20th, that time frame, right around that full moon in late Aquarius, where it's time to get real about what we want, despite all the distractions and all the options that might look shiny or whatnot. What really speaks to us. And that's going to be our assignment essentially here in August. Anyway, so I'll move on from there. And then the last thing I'm going to cover, well, I'm going to throw in a little bonus here just because of what just happened. And I'll talk about some other stuff too. But um, Mercury goes direct August 28th. That's just a few days before Pluto backs into Capricorn. Again, and that's going to last till November 19th. And so we'll just take a brief look at that. So this is the moment when Mercury turns direct. So it'll be at roughly the same degree that it is right now because it just entered that shadow zone. And that's going to happen just before the next new moon. So these new moons and full moons are kind of falling with these significant aspects. And considering that Mercury going direct almost has like a new moon kind of energy. It's a new, okay, now we can start moving forward again, right? That's what this has to do with. And that new moon is going to be in Virgo. Okay. So that's, again, that sign that's part of the Mercury retrograde. We got Venus part of that T square in Virgo. So Virgo energy is pretty strong in August. It's all about, again, getting aligned, getting serious, ensuring that what we're doing has purpose, putting things in order. Okay. So anything that needs to be cleaned up emotionally or mentally, this is a time to do it. Okay. And so we'll be ready to really launch forward with that once this Mercury retrograde is over, is what that's saying. Because when that new moon happens a couple of days later, that's going to be the time to go with that. That'll be in early September. So that new moon also happens just after Pluto re-enters Capricorn. So here it's still in Aquarius, barely. We're talking like four minutes of arc into Aquarius, but just a couple days after this. Because remember, this is August 28th, and then we get September 1st. That's when that will take place. I believe it's Labor Day weekend. Yeah, I think it is that Pluto will re-enter Capricorn. And again, Pluto going back to Capricorn, especially in the U.S., because Pluto was at about 28 degrees, I believe, of Capricorn when the U.S. was formed, Declaration of Independence. And so the U.S. has been going through its Pluto return. Depending on what orb you use, for me, it peaked in 2022, but it started around 2020, and it's ending here in 2024 with this final pass at 29 degrees Capricorn. Okay. So this is a pivotal time for the US. Makes perfect sense that there is, a contest here in November this year for this, because it really is Pluto return for a nation really is kind of like a make or break point for a nation. No human ever lives to their Pluto return, but a nation can. And it really is a time that you have to essentially transform or be destroyed. That's really your two options with Pluto. It's transformation or destruction. And so there's a real collective desire for transformation, okay, that is happening around this time, this in the last several years, okay? And so I'm going to get a little more into that here in the next slide. Like I said, I'll get a little bonus here because of what just happened over the weekend. But here's again that summary of what we just went over, all little pieces. Again, starting with that full moon, 29 degrees Capricorn. That's this weekend, Saturday night into Sunday, the 21st of July, and that really highlights and primes the way for Pluto to come back to that 29th degree. And then we're dealing with this Mercury retrograde from Virgo to Leo, and the T square that involves Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus, with Mars, essentially instigating that whole energy. Okay, so on that topic of the U.S. and the importance of things right now and transformation, and Pluto and Capricorn having a lot to do with centralized power and also having to do with corruption. Okay, and so the next slide here, I don't know if you recognize it. It's roughly the chart of the person that was almost killed over the weekend. Okay, and this person obviously was president in 2016. Big surprise when that person won. They're running again. The polls look really good right now. Prior to the incident over the weekend, now they're like shooting to the roof even further. And the establishment is obviously worried. Okay, so we all have our own opinions about things and whatnot. So I'll just share mine. And I base it mostly on like kind of the chart here that I see of him. Okay, so going back to this past weekend, right around his midheaven. Okay, and it's squaring his Mars at 26 Leo. That is where that we just had. If you're following me on the other social media, you know that the Mars, Uranus, algal fixed star, that triple conjunction that is related thematically to the fall of leaders, specifically doing with the head, for example. And what we saw here obviously was, exactly how it played out in his chart. This is visibility, right? So this was a public event in his life, right? Very out in the public. And essentially his head was the target, right? And it's also the fact that squared his Mars pretty much exactly 26 degrees. And Mars rules Aries, which rules the head. I'm not entirely surprised that the way the astrology works out here for that. But in any case, just to give you an idea of how that works. But I want to talk about this whole idea again of the corruption, the Pluto and Capricorn, and that's coming to an end, right? And when this person, I'm not saying the name because I don't like the way the algorithms work here on YouTube sometimes, but you know who it is. And when this person was running for the election in 2016, I found it very interesting back then that his progressed sun was crossing his ascendant. Okay, so the progressed sun, if you're not familiar, roughly 1 degree per year through your chart. So he was born 23 degrees Gemini. So it took him, about 30 years to get to 23 degrees Cancer, another 30 years to get to 23 degrees Leo. And by the time he was running, and it was over the summer, so it was like this time of year, 8 years ago, 2016, and he was about to get, not only was that progressed sun crossing his ascendant at 29 degrees Leo, but it was also about to enter a new sign. So he's going to have a sign change. And I just found it very interesting. So if we backtrack a little bit, that means a couple of years before that, around 2014, is when that progressed sun was on his Mars. My guess, I don't know, my guess is that's when he got the impulse to say, I'm going to do this. I'm running for president, right? That's probably around when that happened. It's 2014. Be my best guess based on the progressed sun. But anyway, this was a as far as his soul plan goes, that was an extremely important time, right? And what happened right after that? It's like this establishment, media establishment, everything freaked out, and they've been freaking out ever since, right? And that's why it doesn't surprise me what happened over the weekend. There's lots of theories and this and that. I mean, it just seems like it's the natural progression. Everything the establishment has thrown at this person hasn't worked completely. It's almost the last ditch effort you would do. It seems more like that than a random, person with a pew pew. Seems more orchestrated than that, in my opinion. And so, uh, anyway, going back to like the idea of a soul plan, what I highlighted here is a very interesting thing about him. Okay, because he has Uranus right on the north node. It's also conjunct his sun. Essentially, his soul imprint is to disrupt. He's here to disrupt. Disrupt what? Well, he his whole life put him in a position where he had enough money and enough popularity to actually make this run at the president, right? And maybe that was all to set up his true soul intention, which was to disrupt the establishment. And that, I mean, their response to his presence, to his power, to everything, it is very clear that there's something being ruined, right? It's like a big club that just gets ruined by this bull in a china shop. And that's literally what his intent is on a soul level. And another interesting part of this is he was born during a lunar eclipse. So here's the moon opposite his sun, and the moon is on the south node. Now, a south node lunar eclipse, if we're looking at on a soul level, this is someone who's clearing the space. So he doesn't represent the future. He doesn't represent anything to do that. His job is to come in, destroy what is, leave a hole open so it can be filled. And filled by what? We got Pluto entering Aquarius. Again, individuation. So what's happening is his soul plan, in my opinion, is that he came in right at this time when the US is finishing its Pluto return. Pluto's about to enter Aquarius. And so he's really clearing a way for individuation of power and a new system to come on board. So he's wrecking the old system, because the old system was based on, telling us what's true through the media, telling us, right? And everyone just kind of like, whether you voted left or right doesn't really matter, right? Because the establishment had control over both parties. They lost control over one of them when this person disrupted it. Okay, and they want to they obviously want to get it back. But the whole idea is that whole system is on its way out. It's part of this Pluto return. It's that needs to be destroyed so that we can transform into something new. And that something new is going to be, a lot more decentralization of ideas and power. Okay, and it takes someone with enough money that they can't be bribed, and enough of a thick skin to not just cower out. I've never seen anyone in my life that can take what he takes and still just keep going. Most people, they just can shame you out of something, right? That's their whole thing, is they're going to guilt and shame you out of what you're trying to do. And if you're trying to disrupt the whole system that holds, that's been holding things together and holding us as people down, it takes that kind of thick skin. So anyway, just my opinion, what's going on here. And then talking about this election coming up with Pluto at 29 degrees Capricorn, because of the way the polls look, because of the way that the establishment goes after this person, my guess is that there's going to be some to prevent the election from happening at all. Because if it were to go down in a normal fashion, it's obvious who's going to win this time around. And that's just based on math. It's just based on what is going on, and everything that occurs just strengthens that notion. And so when we start getting closer and the establishment sees this writing on the wall, what are they going to do? They're going to try to prevent it from happening. Okay. So just keep that on your radar. I mean, with Pluto at 29 degrees Capricorn for its final run, it's literally the last chance for that centralized power to do something. That's what this window from September 1st to November 19th is. They're going to try to force something. They're going to try. That's just the way they operate. Okay. But anyway, so enough about that. I'm going to finish off and just talk about a little more practical use of astrology that I got to apply it surprisingly. But so I have certain, uh, mind-based intentions for this program that I have, but I got a chance to use it in a way I wouldn't have thought of doing it just recently. And so if you're watching this on YouTube, go to my playlist and go to the Creating Compatibility playlist. That's what I have featured here. So there's 7 videos on there. What I'm doing with this is breaking down each of the personal planets, not just the sun. I mean, I include the sun in there, but Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. Very important to know what sign and placement that we have. This is how we interact with others. Okay, so I termed this creating compatibility, and I know I'm creating it with the mindset of like using this almost like if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs assessments, right? So where I could use this in a formal setting, okay, and do assessments astrologically using the personal planets, um, but do it in a way that's more digestible. So this is oversimplified. It's by element rather than even sign. So it's just air, earth, fire, water, just to make it more conventionally digestible, essentially. And so that's my intent with it. I haven't had a real chance to like move forward with this. My life has been crazy the last several years. I call it a karmic detour, where I haven't really been able to dig in to this stuff. But interestingly enough, just a few weeks ago, I was visiting back where I grew up in New England, and my niece just turned, or she's 17. She's going to be heading to college in the fall, and so my parents they had a place up in Maine, a summer place up in Maine. So my niece basically grew up going up there, and so she just met what will be her roommate in the fall, and so they were going to spend a week up there. So on the day I was leaving, I was literally just out the door, and I was making a joke about, oh, you guys are going to see if you can get along. If you can get along this week, you'll know if you can get along in your dorm, whatever, etc. Um, I wasn't doing anything astrologically. I was just being an uncle, chatting and whatnot. Then I think my niece brought up something about her will be roommate's birthday and how neither one of them turned 18 yet. And then I was like, oh, when's your birthday? And so she told me it was in, early August. And immediately I went into Astro mode because I know my niece is born in early November. So that's a hard Leo to Scorpio square that they have between them. And that's just their sun sign. But of course, just knowing that, I mean, that's enough. That's Bill and Hillary, essentially, the Leo Scorpio. Just knowing that kind of opened up my brain immediately. And I was like, all right, birth information now. And I hopped in the car, and we left them behind. But the whole time I was texting my niece what I was finding between their charts, like what's going on. And so they both found it really fascinating, and it helped them not only during that week, but now it's going to really help them in the fall. So another application of creating compatibility, because it's not about finding compatibility, it's about seeing what you have to work with, and then how do we deal with those energies? Okay, so this is again a more digestible, a more like real world kind of way of using astrology. It's something I've really been wanting to do more of. I've done a little bit of it. I've worked with families doing this, a couple of family situations where grouping people into different elements and talking about, one person's communication style versus another, and, lights going off in people's heads like, wow, that is true, or, things like that. And so this can obviously be applied to relationships, marriages and things like that, but also in a like I said, in business and in whatever. Okay. My initial thought is here using as more like an employee assessment tool, and doing like workshops and things like that. This whole idea of you're gonna have a roommate that you never met before, you got to live together. Wow, this could be a huge tool to help people going off to college, like my niece right now. Anyway, so if you are interested, if this piques your interest, please dig in. creating compatibility. Look at the playlist on YouTube. And this is something again that has so many different applications, but you can review some of the videos. Here I use some analogies to like show the differences in elements depending on whether we're talking about the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. And it can really be enlightening once you realize, you have other parts to yourself. Like, for example, I'm a Pisces sun, but I've got Virgo moon, I've got Mercury in Aries, and I've got Venus in Aquarius. So these are like all very different expressions, but it all kind of coagulates and solidifies into one individual kind of a snapshot. And I think this is going to be important for Pluto and Aquarius, again, because of that individuation that we're heading into. So very important to know people as individuals and their unique makeup, so we can better understand each other and get along despite disagreement, right? To be free, we must disagree, right? If everyone's in agreement, that's not freedom, right? And so it's important as Pluto moves into Aquarius here for good for the next 20 years that we have methods of approaching differences of opinion, disagreements, different ways of coming at problems, etc. And so this tool really does help with that. Whether you're living together, whether you're working together, doesn't matter. This is hugely beneficial. Anyway, thanks for sticking with me. Uh, be sure to share this with anyone you think would also appreciate an understanding of what's happening over this summer, or the rest of the summer, I should say. And please do follow me. Facebook, I have Sovereign Harmony Astrology on Facebook, probably my most amount of followers. So more interactions there. You can also do Sovereign Harmony Astrology on Instagram. I try to post there. It's not like my best tool. I actually just started doing that like probably a few months ago. And then I got Telegram, which is kind of a placeholder. That's building slowly. And then I've got a Twitter account as well. It's all Sovereign Harmony Astrology. So you can find it there. Best way to get, more frequent updates of what's going on, especially the new moons, full moons. Like tomorrow, I'll be posting about the full moon that I just talked about here earlier, but in written form. So anyway, thanks again for stopping by, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Have a great rest of your summer. Bye.